Vittoria, get in the car quickly, please. I'm already late for the meeting, Leon exclaimed impatiently. She looked at her husband, confused. He was standing beside the car with the door open clearly, irritated. His tone of voice and impatient expression betrayed his frustration. Wait a minute, she pleaded, turning around. Vittoria cast one last glance at the hospital building, where she had spent the last month and a half recovering from the trauma of losing her baby. Her eyes were still red from crying so much. Never in her life had she shed so many tears as in recent times. Vittoria. Her husband's voice sounded harsher. I don't have time to wait for you. She quickly wiped away the tears streaming down her face and hurried into the car. I feel so bad, she murmured, a few minutes later as they drove along the road leading to the gated community where they lived. You're always feeling bad, Leon interrupted coldly. When you got pregnant and had that awful morning sickness, you were always in a bad mood, he complained constantly. And then, when you lost the baby, you plunged into depression and didn't want to see anyone, not even me. Vittoria looked at him with a look full of pain and resentment. Vittoria just looked at her husband, but he continued to reprimand her severely. And all this time, no matter how much I tried to explain to you that a miscarriage isn't a final sentence and that you can still have children. And it wasn't me who said that. It was the doctor, Leosio emphasized. But you didn't even bother to think about how this affects me. It's always just you and you again. Vittoria pressed her lips, together hurt, and remained silent. In the last 6 months, in fact, she had felt an intense lack of her husband's attention, and there were reasons for it. Leosio was considered an extremely successful businessman in the city. He spent days and nights at work, doing everything to expand his leather furniture company into the national market. At times, his dedication to business bordered on obsession. All conversations revolved around how to improve and accelerate the company's growth and how to increase profits even more. His family and wife seemed to have taken a back seat. As Vittoria worked remotely as a web designer, she began to feel increasingly alone, as if she were unimportant to anyone. Parents had passed away years ago, and she had almost no friends. The only exception was Amanda, whom she had met after she and Leosio moved to that city. Amanda understood Vittoria's problems and became her only refuge. The only reason she hadn't yet gone mad with loneliness. Despite everything, Vittoria tried to dedicate most of her time to her family and home. She managed, alone and without the help of maids, to keep the large, beautiful house impeccably clean. Furthermore, she prepared varied and delicious dinners for her husband's arrival. To an outsider, they seemed like the perfect family, a true model to follow. But as soon as they crossed the threshold of their home, this image completely crumbled, revealing a harsh reality. How can you blame me at a time like this? Vittoria asked softly as soon as Leosio finished his explosive complaint. When I felt unwell, do you remember? Was it you who told me to call an ambulance and not bother you with nonsense? She stared at him intently, without blinking, as he drove. Now don't compare things, Leosio said, without taking his eyes off the road. At that moment, I was in a meeting on which the future of the company depended. And indeed, our own financial well-being. Vittoria turned her face to the window and remained silent. Last month, she had turned 34 and had wanted with all her heart to have that child. She knew that, as the years went by, her chances of getting pregnant would only decrease. Leosio, none of this would have happened if, at least from time to time, you had put me first instead of your work, she said, her voice breaking. You're always traveling for business, in meetings. You're almost never home. The loss of our baby hurts me deeply, but we're both responsible for what happened. Don't you think? She looked at her husband hopefully, hoping her words would awaken in him, if not passion, at least a little understanding. What I think is that I'm exhausted, Leosio replied coldly. Tired of you and this endless conversation. When we get home, iron my suit for tomorrow's meeting. He gave a few more orders about household chores, and after that, the rest of the journey was made in complete silence. A month later, Vittoria received an unexpected call from a notary. To her surprise, she had inherited an estate from her grandmother Antonia, who left her everything in her will. It was a tiny, somewhat dilapidated house located by the sea. Unfortunately, Vittoria barely knew her grandmother Antonia. Her mother, Angela, had had a terrible falling out with her in the past, and as a result, the two had hardly spoken for years. Vittoria remembered visiting her grandmother only once or twice, but she didn't remember the sea or the house where she had once been. Besides, she hadn't fully recovered from the loss of her baby and didn't want to deal with the bureaucracy of the will. To be honest, she didn't care much what happened to that house. From the photos sent by the notary, the place was in deplorable condition. Restoring it would require spending money, and Vittoria had neither the time nor the inclination for that. Well, let that house stay there, she said to her friend Amanda. What do I need it for? What would I do with that house? Sitting across from her in the kitchen, having coffee, Amanda's eyes widened in surprise. Vittoria, are you serious? This isn't just any house, it's a beach house, it's us. Did you hear me, by the sea? She emphasized, pronouncing the words slowly and lightly, tapping her temple. When? How much longer do you intend to stay there brooding over all this? Vittoria just sighed dejectedly. Amanda, please don't start to, but this is unbelievable. How could you let an opportunity like this pass you by? Exclaimed her excited friend. Tell me, when you're going there, at least you'll rest your mind, recover emotionally, not to mention the weather, which, according to the doctors, would be great for you. The friends were chatting animatedly and didn't even notice when Leosio arrived home. Hearing the voices coming from the kitchen, he intended to go straight there. However, upon overhearing parts of the conversation about inheritance, he stopped immediately. Could I get my hands on this? He thought, intrigued. Amanda took her friend's cell phone and found the notary's number. For God's sake, who would want a house falling apart? Asked Vittoria, sketching a sad smile. My dear, how naive you are. Amanda rolled her eyes. Believe me, there are people out there who would give anything to get their hands on such a valuable piece of land. She confirmed all the details about the will with the lawyer. Meanwhile, Leonzo felt his mouth go dry listening to the conversation. Leosio cleared his throat loudly before finally entering the kitchen, pretending to have only heard the end of the conversation. So girls, enjoying your free time? Yo? He asked casually, as if nothing had happened. Pia? Then, as if it were nothing, he asked, Vittoria, was it my imagination, or did I hear the word inheritance? Cool. Were you talking to the notary? Vittoria felt uncomfortable and somewhat awkward, quickly explaining the situation. Leosio maintained a bored expression as if the news had no importance whatsoever. Nevocia. I understand. I thought it was something serious, he said, showing no interest before heading towards the closet, leaving Vittoria and Amanda alone. But instead of settling into the room, Leosio picked up his cell phone and sent a message to Rute, his mistress. Shortly after, he was in his apartment telling her the news. Onzu. In the real estate agent's eyes shone the same greed that he himself felt upon hearing about the inheritance. My dear, this is simply perfect, she said, excitedly. A plot of land on the edge? Do you have any idea how much that could be worth? If it's well planned and put up for sale in the right market, it could yield a fortune. Ruth worked as a real estate agent in the same city where Leosio's wife lived. In fact, it was precisely during the purchase of the house where he lived with Vittoria that he met his mistress. You're a real estate specialist here, right? I. Leosio said, flirting while wrapping his arms around his mistress's waist in a tight embrace. Hi. So tell me, what can we do about this? Ruth smiled broadly. Her mind was already calculating the approximate value of the deal. "You have no idea how profitable this sale could be," she exclaimed, before kissing him fervently. Then, unexpectedly, she added, "But I have one condition. Take me with you when you sell the house. I want to personally oversee the sale to ensure you get the best possible price to a good class." Leosio frowned for a moment, then smiled. "The problem is that first I need to convince my wife to get rid of this dump," he replied. "She can claim the inheritance immediately." The notary said that her grandmother's will was found by chance and the deadline for formalization has already arrived. Ruth smiled calculatingly. "Then we need to act fast. Land in that region is highly sought after, and I don't even want to think about the possibility of losing this opportunity." Leon pulled her closer and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it. As soon as I get the money, I'll kick Victoria out of the house, and then, finally, we'll be together." Leoncio waited a few days so as not to arouse suspicion. Then, one night, he purposefully canceled an important meeting and decided to stay home. "Victoria, can we talk?" he asked in a tone. "I think you've already realized that I'm here with you today on purpose." Victoria looked at her husband, surprised. "Why this sudden change?" she asked cautiously. Leoncio lowered his head, pretending to search for the right words. Then he raised his eyes and stared at her with an expression full of regret. "You know, I've been thinking," he began, sounding hesitant. "For a long time I've been selfish. When you were pregnant, I should have been more present, but I only thought about work and money." Jenna looked away without answering. He took advantage of the silence and continued, gently holding her hand to appear more convincing. "Listen, I want to fix things. Let's not fix things. Let's start from scratch things. Let's start from scratch." Leocio's words were so warm, so sincere that Vittoria unintentionally. "I'm willing, but what do you suggest, she asked. Leocio smiled, feigning guilt, and enveloped her in a gentle embrace. "Remember the house on the beach? The one your grandmother left you? How about we sell it? I heard we can get a great price for it," Leocio continued. "With that money, we can build a real palace by the sea. That way we could go there every 2 months, rest from work, and at the same time, solve your problem with the pregnancy. You still want a baby, don't you? He looked at Vittoria with a gaze full of love and admiration. She was deeply moved by the fact that he finally seemed to put her interests above his own. "And you, Leocio, do you really want to save our marriage? Her eyes filled with tears. Her husband agreed with conviction. "Yes, I've thought a lot about all this. I feel terribly guilty about how I treated you, and that's why I want us to have a second chance so badly." Vittoria, without realizing it, had already fallen into the trap of her husband's sweet words. "If that's the case, I'll call the notary and tell him we'll be traveling soon. I'll formalize the inheritance for both of us, right?" "That's right," murmured Leocio, holding her tightly in his arms so she wouldn't see the smile of satisfaction forming on his face. Happy, Vittoria gave him a tender kiss. That night, a new hope shone in her heart. A few days later, she was already on the beach, breathing deeply the pure, salty sea air. Wherever she looked, breathtaking landscapes and picturesque valleys stretched out. After so many years living in the city, Vittoria had almost forgotten that places of such beauty still existed. After signing all the necessary documents at the notary's office, she and Leocio received the keys to her grandmother Antonia's house and headed there. It was a quiet coastal town, almost a village, with rustic and welcoming charm. To her surprise, her grandmother's house was practically on the seashore. Only a few hundred meters separated the small building from the vast blue expanse. My God, what a wonderful place! Isn't it beautiful, Leocio? she asked excitedly, admiring the landscape. He, however, was more interested in analyzing a map of the region. Ah, yes, he replied distractedly, and then, unable to contain his true concern, added, "You know, your grandmother's house is located on extremely valuable land. I think we can sell it for an excellent price without even needing to give a discount." Victoria felt uneasy when she realized her husband was talking about money again, but the beauty of the place and the fragmented memories of her childhood filled her mind, muffling that thought. Carefully, she turned the key in the lock of the old wooden door, which seemed to be hanging by a thread. Upon entering, she found the room almost empty. The space was small and modest, furnished only with an old sofa and a few chairs. Besides the sofa and chairs, there was an old iron bed with a rusty metal screen and an old bookcase that, to Victoria's surprise, didn't have as many books as she had imagined. At the end of her life, her eyesight was already very poor, said a hoarse, aged voice behind Victoria. She turned quickly and saw an old sailor wearing a striped shirt. The man with a thick beard and a face wrinkled by time observed her with gray eyes like the sea before a storm. Sebastião Antunes, the old man introduced himself, extending his calloused, sunburnt hand for a firm handshake. His eyes, previously cautious, softened as he met hers. "So you're Antonia's granddaughter? May God rest her soul," he murmured, quickly making the sign of the cross. "I'm your neighbor. I've lived here for many years. Your grandmother was a great friend. I knew Antonia when everyone around here still just called her Tonia. She was a beautiful woman, you know?" Victoria felt uncomfortable realizing how little she knew about her own grandmother. With a shy smile, she gave Sebastião an embarrassed look. Suddenly behind him, with an irritated expression, Leocio appeared in the doorway. "Need to see." "Hey, old man, how did you end up here?" "Get out of here while you still can, before things get ugly. There's no need to scare my wife." The sailor turned slowly and cast a disdainful glance at Victoria's husband, analyzing him from head to toe. "Ah, Victoria, it seems you weren't very lucky with your husband, a bourgeois. And a clever one at that," Sebastião muttered ironically. Leocio's eyes narrowed, full of anger. "Beggar, you've gone completely mad, human. Get out of here now before I call the police." "Leocio, what are you doing?" Victoria reprimanded, raising her voice. "That man was a friend of my grandmother's. Please, treat him with respect." Now it was Leocio's turn to be surprised by his wife's audacity. "Oh, and to be called a clever bourgeois by that old man. Is that all right with you? Whose side are you on?" "You started it," Victoria retorted, crossing her arms. Then she turned to the sailor. "Sebastião, I apologize for this misunderstanding. If you'd like, come have tea with us later. We've rented an apartment nearby while we decide what to do with the house. Sebastião looked at her, then at Leocio, who was still fuming with anger, and finally shook his head. "Thank you for the invitation, but I have some urgent commitments," he said, politely declining. Before leaving, he gestured to where he lived. "If you need me, I live over there, behind that rock formation on top of the hill. I'll always be nearby." With one last unfriendly look at Leocio, the old sailor turned and walked slowly away. "Crazy old man," Leocio muttered, shaking his head disdainfully. Leocio looked back at the map. "Thank God we won't see that old man again. Why do you say that?" "I'd like to visit him someday while we're still here, bah." "I want to ask more about my grandmother," Victoria replied firmly. "Absolutely not," ordered Leocio, his voice sounding harsher. "You don't even know this fellow. How can you be sure he really knew your grandmother? What if he's some lunatic making up this story to trick you? My God, I don't even want to think about it." A shiver ran down his spine, and he quickly changed the subject. "Let's go to our apartment. Wait for me there while I take a walk to see if there's anything interesting around here. I want to check out the local businesses, The situation wasn't as easy as he and Ruth had anticipated. Leosio knew his mistress had her own plans for the money from the sale of the house and land, inland. To prevent her interference, he left her in the city where they lived, making up an excuse. He said he first needed to carefully analyze the situation before calling her. Ruth didn't like this at all, but Leosio knew how to impose his will. Now, with a clearer mind, he walked to a meeting with the best real estate broker in the region, Claudio. The specialist immediately realized that Leosio was the type who wanted to get rich quickly. And as someone who didn't mind ignoring certain ethical principles for a good commission, he quickly reassured him. "Don't worry, we'll resolve everything in the best way for you," Claudio assured him with a shrewd smile. "Just wait for my call. I believe that within a week or two I will find a buyer willing to pay a more than generous price for the land." The broker extended his hand to Leosio, who shook it firmly. "Excellent. I hope we have a good understanding," said Leosio, raising his eyebrows suggestively. "Amen. Believe me, if you do a good job, I will know how to reward you." He paused and added in a warning tone, "Just remember, one thing, don't tell my wife anything. It would be a huge problem if she found out the true value of this land." Claudio, maintaining his professional and calm demeanor, assured him that confidentiality would be maintained. With that, Leonzo left the real estate agency completely satisfied with himself. Shortly after, he went up to the rented apartment where he was staying with Vittoria, certain that everything was going exactly as planned. On the kitchen table, Leosio found a short and direct note. "Leosio, I went to Sebastian's house. Don't call me. I turned off my cell phone. I'll be back in the late afternoon. Vittoria." The businessman didn't like his wife's. He knew that man was shrewd enough to see through him. Furthermore, knowing Vittoria's sensitivity, he feared that the old man would manage to turn her against him, threatening to ruin his main plan. Great. "When you get back, Vittoria, I'll teach you not to disobey your husband," thought Leosio, irritated. At the same time, he picked up his cell phone and sent a message to his trusted banker. He needed to prepare a secure account where he could transfer all the money as soon as the sale was to be completed. Now, the most important thing was to keep the deposit from Claudio, the broker. Meanwhile, Vittoria finally found Sebastian's house. It was a simple but well-kept building near a charming stone chalet. The old sailor was a little way off, busy fishing. When Vittoria called him, he greeted her with a warm smile and invited her in. Later, while preparing a delicious fresh fish soup, Vittoria took the opportunity to ask him to tell her more about her grandmother. "Do you understand? I was very young at the time, and after my mother argued with my grandmother Antonia, we hardly had any contact anymore," Vittoria continued. "I remember that occasionally some letters would arrive on holidays, but my mother wouldn't even read them. She'd throw them away immediately." Sebastian agreed thoughtfully. "Yes, Antonia and her mother had a very difficult relationship," the sailor commented. "Angela was always an impulsive woman. She dreamed of leaving here and going to the capital. She never had the sea in her heart, you know. He shook his head, recalling the past. When Angela met her father, Esteban, and that was the end of her relationship with her grandmother. Antonia was furious. After all, Esteban was a big city man full of ideas and plans. He bewitched her mother, took her away, and Antonia was left alone. Since then, she was never the same. But they tried to reconcile, didn't they? Vittoria asked, thoughtfully. "I remember my mother bringing me here a few times when I was little." Yes, they tried, Sebastian agreed. Leschiamo agreed. But apparently, it didn't work. What happened between them? Only they knew. I myself never fully understood. He shrugged, as if accepting that some things would never be clarified. Then he took the kettle off the stove where the water was already boiling. "It's a shame that everything ended like this," Vittoria murmured with a sigh. For a moment, They both remained silent, lost in their own thoughts. Then, suddenly, Sebastian seemed to remember something and looked at Vittoria curiously. Your grandmother loved another man her whole life. Vittoria's eyes widened. Surprised. What do you mean? Is that exactly what you heard? You heard. Sebastian confirmed with a mischievous look. His name was Romain. Vittoria said. You see? He even looked like an actor. What was that actor's name again? Ah, yes, Tarcisio Meira. Vittoria burst into laughter, and the old sailor laughed along before continuing. But actually, the story isn't funny at all, eh? It was quite sad. Antonia fell madly in love with this sailor who passed through here once. Only God knows what would have become of her if she had known the truth immediately. What truth? What happened? Vittoria frowned. Serious. Romain disappeared at sea. He never returned. The smile vanished from Vittoria's face and they never found him. Sebastian shook his head with a heavy sigh. We didn't hide the truth from her as much as we could. But when she finally found out, Antonia cried so much that the whole town heard her lamentations. She never managed to forget him. He paused, looking at the horizon. He was faithful to her feelings until the end of his life. He carried that love in his heart until his last day. Vittoria felt a pang in her chest. Thank you for telling me this story, she said, moved. For me, it's very important to know my family's past. I grew up knowing almost nothing about my own family. My mother and I lived very isolated lives, confessed Vittoria. She hugged the old sailor goodbye, thanking him once more before returning home. That night, Leosio made a real scene. Instead of wandering around with people you don't even know, why don't you focus on finding a buyer for this house? What if one of the rich people in the region is interested in this land to build a mansion? I've already made some preliminary inquiries, I'm still thinking about whether I really want to sell my grandmother's house, Vittoria blurted out unexpectedly. Leosio was speechless, unable to believe what he was hearing. What? But we already agreed on this. Don't tell me that old man filled you with nonsense about preserving the family inheritance and all that sentimental drivel. Don't talk to me in that tone. Vittoria exploded. How dare you mock my family's memory? She shook her head, disappointed, and with a tired sigh, murmuring, I think I'm starting to regret taking this trip. Without saying anything more, she turned and went to the room, slamming the door shut. 2 days later, while Leoncio waited impatiently, the long-awaited phone call finally arrived. Claudio, the broker, asked him to come to his office. As soon as Leoncio entered, the man greeted him enthusiastically. I have great news for you. So, they have grand plans for your wife's land, said Claudio with a glint of excitement in his eyes. Point. And what exactly are they proposing? Asked Leoncio, trying to sound as composed as possible, although he felt a shiver of expectation run down his spine. It's a company specializing in the construction of luxury hotels, explained Claudio, leaning forward. They're precisely looking for land to build. Leoncio's eyes gleamed, like incandescent embers, as the broker described the details of the transaction. It will be a high-end hotel, a true exclusive tourist destination for top-tier clients, only people with platinum credit cards. And as you can imagine, these people don't worry about prices. They'll pay whatever it takes. Claudio smiled slightly, pleased with his own persuasion. There's nothing to think about. Accept the offer. If the broker had known the whirlwind of emotions that gripped Leoncio at that moment, he would have asked for a percentage 3 times higher than agreed. But years of negotiations had taught the businessman to maintain a cold expression and a calculating gaze. He wouldn't allow anyone to deceive him, much less a clever broker trying to profit at his expense. Therefore, he remained as distant and impassive as possible without showing the excitement that was boiling inside him. To ensure that these buyers are truly trustworthy, let's schedule another meeting in 3 days. Then, I will give my final answer, declared Leoncio. As you wish, said Claudio, shrugging. But be aware that the representatives of this company don't like to wait. Leoncio stood up firmly and said goodbye to the broker. Meanwhile, Ruth had lost patience and decided to go to the city herself to see how things were progressing. But what the hell are you doing here? I wasn't clear when I said, you should only come after I called you, Leoncio hissed, pulling his lover's suitcase out of the taxi. I wasn't clear when I said, you should only come after I called you. Ruth smiled innocently, pretending not to understand his irritation. What's wrong? Did you change your mind and decide to leave me out of the deal? Of course not, he retorted sharply. Leoncio took her to a nearby cafe, where they could talk without drawing attention. The two discussed the sale of the land enthusiastically and didn't even notice the old sailor sitting in the shade of a large decorative palm tree. The broad leaves perfectly hid Sebastian from curious glances, but for him every word of that conversation was perfectly audible. Leoncio, the broker is right. You need to sell this land to the hotel investors as soon as possible, before they find another option, insisted Ruth. What? And you think I didn't try? Exclaimed Leoncio, frustrated. The problem is that Vittoria started saying she might not want to sell her grandmother's house anymore. She claimed it has sentimental value for her. Oh, please. Ruth huffed impatiently. Then make something up. Say it's essential for your business. Promise something. I don't know, you're her husband. After all, she has to listen to you. Meanwhile, Sebastian, who had listened to every word of that conversation, was certain he couldn't stand idly by. As he suspected from the beginning, Leoncio was a scoundrel who deceived his own wife just to profit. And now? He was willing to pressure her into selling the land at any cost. He waited patiently until Leoncio and Ruth left the cafe and, without drawing attention, began to follow them. Discreetly, he took an old device from his bag, an old camera. With a few quick clicks, he captured compromising images of the pair. There was Ruth passionately kissing her lover. And in another photo, Leon posed intimately, clearly demonstrating that they were not just business partners. Meanwhile, Leon increased the pressure on Vittoria, trying to convince her to sell the house by any means, but to his surprise, she remained firm. Leoncio, I've thought a lot about this, Vittoria said calmly, looking directly at him, and I've decided I'm not going to sell my grandmother's house. I can't simply get rid of the place where my mother grew up. Something in Leoncio's gaze suddenly changed. For the first time, Vittoria saw genuine despair in his eyes. He sighed deeply before beginning to speak, his voice heavy with feigned suffering. I tried to hide this from you for a long time. I didn't want to worry you, especially after the loss of the baby. Vittoria frowned in confusion as her husband continued his dramatization. But the truth is, if we don't sell this land, we simply won't be able to continue living. The shock on his wife's face inwardly cheered Leoncio. He realized he had found her weak point, something he could exploit to manipulate her. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy, he continued, feigning regret. Business is going from bad to worse. Clients are leaving us and preferring cheaper competitors who... Leoncio then paused dramatically before kneeling before her. I know I was an idiot to hide the truth from you, but now only you can save us. If we sell this house and the land for the hotel, we'll have a new beginning, a secure future. Vittoria was completely stunned. Was he telling the truth? If he was, it would be selfish of her not to help him. Please, my love, Leoncio whispered, pleading, in a calculated way. Vittoria felt uncertainty growing inside her, threatening her decision. I need to think. I'm sorry, she said, her voice faltering. With effort, she freed herself from Leoncio's arms and hurried out of the apartment. She needed air, a moment alone to organize her thoughts. Perhaps nature itself would bring her the answer. Without realizing it, her steps led her to her grandmother's house. The night sky was turbulent. Waves crashed violently against the rocks as if trying to warn her of something. Vittoria took a deep breath, feeling the salty air and the smell of ozone in the wind. "Looks like a storm is coming," she thought, and decided to go inside for shelter. When she was near the door, something on the ground caught her attention. An envelope. With a tightness in her chest, she hurried to pick it up and open it. At that exact moment, the first thunderclaps echoed in the sky. "My God!" exclaimed Vittoria, startled. But the real shock came when she saw the contents of the envelope. Black and white photographs fell out, scattering across the floor. Money. Her heart stopped when she recognized Leosio, embracing another woman intimately. Trembling, she picked up one of the photos to get a better look. On the back, someone had written in shaky, hurried handwriting, "Don't trust him." Someone was trying to warn her about her husband's true motives. Vittoria felt a chill run down her spine. Her instincts screamed that she needed to stay there, that she shouldn't go home that night. The storm intensified during the night. The icy rain lashed the windows and the wind raged relentlessly. The rough sea kept Vittoria from sleeping, and her thoughts about Leoncio's betrayal tormented her even more. The next morning, exhausted, she returned to the apartment and, without hesitation, threw the photos in her husband's face. "So is this how you worry about our family's future?" she said with a bitter smile. "Vittoria, what's gotten into you?" exclaimed Leoncio, picking up the photos that had fallen to the floor. Seeing the images, he realized the lying was pointless. With a grim laugh, he stared at his wife. It was pointless. With a grim laugh, he stared at his wife. "You won't get me laugh," he stared at his wife. "You won't get his wife. You won't get either my house or my land. We're getting a divorce, custody of your land. We're getting a divorce," declared Vittoria firmly. "You can take your mistress and go back to the city, because I'm staying here." So now you've decided to live in that place." "The shack is falling apart." Leosio scoffed. "You won't survive the first storm." Vittoria remained calm. "Survive tonight." She didn't answer coldly. She turned to the door, and without looking back, added, "The divorce papers will arrive by messenger. Until then, God be with you." And with those words, she left for good, freeing herself from that marriage built on lies and betrayals. In the following days, Vittoria took her suitcases and belongings to her grandmother's house. Later, she would return to collect the rest of her things from her old home, but for now, she only needed the essentials to transform the abandoned house into a real home. The next few days became a true relief. Vittoria turned off her cell phone, finally freeing herself from Leosio's insistent phone calls and his desperate attempts to convince her to sell the house. Now, she knew that none of his words had been sincere. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. Walking along the beach, breathing the salty air and feeling the cool breeze on her face, she realized how much she had neglected her own happiness alongside a man who never truly valued her. It was during one of these walks that she noticed a young woman painting by the shore. The artist applied thick, striking brushstrokes to the canvas, capturing the landscape expressively. "It's turning out very well," commented Vittoria, observing the young woman's painting. The painter smiled, without taking her eyes off the canvas. "Thank you. I come here almost every morning to paint. The angle is great, and the light hits that rock over there in an incredible way." She pointed to an imposing rock formation that rose above the choppy waters. The way the tide crashed against the rock, it seemed as if the rock advanced over the waves, cutting them with its sharp base. "It's really beautiful," murmured Vittoria, enchanted. The young woman introduced herself and revealed her name was Leticia. Enjoying the conversation, Vittoria invited her for tea at her house. Luckily, Leticia accepted the invitation, but warned that she couldn't stay long. "I take care of someone who is sick. I can't be away for too long," she explained. "I understand. When someone we love is sick, there's nothing more difficult," said Vittoria. Leticia smiled gently. "But we're dealing with it," she replied. "I hope my paintings will be sold by the local galleries." She has an acquaintance who can recommend them for an exhibition in the capital. Vittoria felt an immediate connection with that young artist. Letitia was charming and humble, and it seemed that she had finally found a kindred spirit, Mombiet. They could talk for hours about art and painting, about how difficult it was to survive in the world without anyone's support. In a short time, the two became true friends. Vittoria never imagined that in that small coastal village she would find such a strong friendship, something she hadn't felt for years. Before, her only confidante was Amanda, who was now so distant. Let's stop by the art gallery, Letitia suggested one day. I want to show you some of my favorite works by emerging artists from here. That way you can get to know our provincial talent better. She joked. Vittoria thought the idea was excellent, and they agreed to meet at the gallery at 4 p.m. However, when Vittoria arrived at the place, which was in a more remote part of town, she noticed that Letitia hadn't arrived yet. Worried, she sent an audio message. Letitia, I just arrived. Where are you? Shortly after, she received a reply. I'm a little late, but I'm on my way. Wait for me, don't go away. Despite the reassuring response, Vittoria felt a slight unease. Vittoria remained waiting for Letitia at the entrance of the gallery, taking the time to observe the surrounding neighborhood. The place seemed peaceful, but something inside her made her feel an inexplicable restlessness. Meanwhile, Letitia was far away on the edge, very close to Vittoria's house. With a predatory gaze, she carefully analyzed the old building, making sure that no one was nearby. After ensuring there were no witnesses, she took a pocket knife and skillfully unlocked the old latch on one of the windows. Silently, she crept inside the house. Let's begin, she whispered to herself, kneeling on the floor in a secluded corner of the house. With precise movements, she began tapping on the floorboards and walls, as if searching for something hidden. The truth was that Letitia hadn't approached Vittoria by chance. She was an experienced con artist and knew exactly how to manipulate people to her advantage. Her strategy was always the same: discover their weaknesses and become someone trustworthy to them, ma'am. After all, Letitia had never been an artist. In reality, she barely knew how to hold a paintbrush. The paintings she displayed as her own were bought from a young centenarian who lived in another part of town. Christian, a talented young man forgotten by society, lived in a makeshift tent on the beach. With only a few pencils and cheap paints, he created true masterpieces out of pieces. Christian was what she called a young centenarian, and his painting style fit perfectly into Letitia's plan. Thanks to his talent, she managed to create a convincing image of an artist and become someone trustworthy in Vittoria's eyes. As winning the friendship of a lonely and emotionally vulnerable woman like Vittoria was the easiest part of the plan. Even before approaching her, Letitia had carefully investigated her life. Through her contacts, she discovered who Vittoria was, who her husband was, and that her grandmother's house was about to be sold. It was at that moment that she realized she needed to act fast, otherwise she would lose access to him forever. Letitia wasn't just any con artist. She came from a family involved in criminal activities for generations. Her relatives were part of an old group of local smugglers specializing in the legal transport of exclusive goods and stolen property. Among their illicit businesses was the trafficking of valuable works of art to foreign collectors. Recently, Letitia found something that deeply intrigued her: an old diary that had belonged to her great-uncle. He had died years ago, during an armed confrontation that occurred in one of his clandestine operations. In the yellowed pages of the diary, Letitia made a shocking discovery. The text spoke of a hidden treasure, part of the loot from an old group of pirates. The diary described how this crew smuggled rare diamonds of inestimable beauty and value. The precious cargo had been divided among the gang members, and in total, there were 4 containers full of diamonds, each weighing almost 1 kilogram. Part of these jewels ended up in the hands of a young sailor who had happened to get involved with the smugglers. His name was Romo, and he deeply regretted getting involved in that dangerous adventure. That night, while the others celebrated a huge profit, Romo, already drunk, ended up confessing to one of the older smugglers that he intended to hide his share of the fortune in the house of the woman he loved, Antonia. The man laughed and teased him. "Aren't you afraid that your beloved will get the diamonds and send them to the other world?" But Roma was completely certain that he could trust her. Therefore, he believed that this was the only place where his treasure would be safe. Letitia knew that at that time, smugglers and thieves usually hid valuable goods in basements or under the floorboards of houses. She was absolutely certain that she could find the box with the jewels. Her instinct did not deceive her. Using a crowbar she had brought with her, she began to lift the floorboards opened, but she was interrupted by a sudden frightening sound. Someone was knocking on the door. "Victoria, are you there?" Sebastian's voice rang out from outside. Letitia cowered on the floor, holding her breath as the old sailor walked around the house investigating. He noticed that one of the windows was open, and, thinking the strong wind had pushed it open, closed it again, placing a heavy stone to prevent it from opening again. After a while, convinced that everything was in order, Sebastian walked away and returned home. Only after hearing his footsteps disappear into the distance did Letitia dare to move again. Looking at her watch, Letitia realized she was already quite late for her meeting with Vittoria. Without time to explain, she simply sent a message saying that unfortunately she couldn't go because her mother was feeling very unwell. Of course, this story about her sick mother was just another lie, but Letitia didn't want to risk anything that night. She wouldn't go back inside Vittoria's house anytime soon, at least not for the time being. "What do we have here?" An unexpected visitor, said a male voice behind her with a slightly ironic tone. Letitia froze for a moment, but then turned around naturally. Before her stood Leosio, dressed in an elegant light linen suit with an insinuating smile on his lips. He seemed absurdly confident. The young criminal's mind quickly formulated a new plan. "Actually, I just came to visit my friend," she replied in a sweet and provocative tone, but it seemed she had chosen the wrong time. Immediately, Letitia realized she could take advantage of the situation. The tension between Vittoria and her husband was obvious, and if she knew how to play her cards right, she could turn this marital crisis into an advantage for herself. Little flirting, a little manipulation. If she played it the right way, she could make Leosio useful to her. "And how exactly could we be useful to each other?" he asked, curiously, leaning slightly towards her. Letitia smiled mischievously before beginning to speak. So, without hesitation, he revealed the existence of the hidden treasure in Vittoria's house. What? The possibility of selling the land for a great price and, on top of that, getting his hands on the hidden diamonds was too tempting for Leosio. He decided, without any remorse, that it was time to get rid of Vittoria once and for all. Shortly before that, with great effort, he managed to send Ruti back to the city. He was fed up with the constant nagging and complaints from his mistresses. Besides, now there was a worthy replacement, Letitia, Wasia. Here, if you bring her to this point, no one will ever find her. "The water is very deep," Letitia explained, pointing to a specific spot on the map. Leosio smiled. "Very good," he prayed. "You are much smarter than my boy." He sighed. "But don't worry, soon all this will be resolved and you won't regret helping me." Letitia just smiled, calculating. She already knew well the kind of man Leosio was. Men like that were useful for business, but never reliable for anything else. What Leosio didn't realize was that the young con artist also had her own plans. The next day, he spent hours trying to convince Vittoria to meet him. He had already arranged everything. He rented a small boat and planned to take her to a secluded bay where they could talk calmly. "Vittoria, at least one last conversation," he insisted. "Let's take a walk along the coast." We can clear everything up once and for all. We've been together for 7 years. Can't we at least have one last conversation and settle the divorce like civilized people? Leosio insisted. I promise I won't talk about the house anymore. Vittoria didn't want to see or hear him, but despite everything, she couldn't deny that after so many years by his side, some confused emotions still lingered within her. In the end, she decided there was nothing wrong with simply talking. She agreed to take the boat trip to the old Bahia. During the journey, Leosio was extremely gentlemanly, maintaining a friendly tone and even offering her a glass of wine. No thank you, Vittoria refused. What a pity, he commented before downing his glass in one gulp. Then, suddenly he widened his eyes and pointed behind her. Look, that's a family of dolphins. Instinctively, Vittoria turned to where he was pointing. In that same instant, she felt the violent blow strike her head. Her vision exploded in a flash of pain before everything went dark. The next sense that awakened was the cold, the icy sensation of salt water enveloping her body. That's it, Vittoria. End of the line. No body, no problem, Leosio murmured with a cruel smile. After making sure no one was around, he revved the engine and quickly fled the scene of the crime. What he didn't realize was that, at that exact moment, someone was watching everything from atop a small cliff. Nearby, sitting in the sun and trying to warm himself, was Christian, the young man from whom Letitia bought paintings. He was relaxing, observing the sea, when he heard a short feminine scream. What he saw next made him freeze for a moment. Leosio was pushing his wife into the water. Without hesitating for a second, Christian ran and plunged into the rough sea, swimming against the strong current of that region. As the waters were treacherous, and the struggle against the waves was exhausting. But he didn't give up. With great effort, he managed to glimpse victory, slowly sinking into the darkness of the ocean. Diving as deep as he could, he reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her up with all his might. After dragging her to the beach, he began administering first aid, trying to revive her. Moments later, he called emergency services. The paramedics arrived quickly and praised Christian for his quick thinking. If she had stayed submerged for a few more seconds, she wouldn't have survived, said one of the rescuers. Carefully, they placed Vittoria in the ambulance and took her to the nearest hospital. Christian remained on the beach, trying to process what he had just witnessed. Even though he had never seen Vittoria before, he felt an unexpected warmth in his chest as he remembered her serene expression, observing the horizon, seconds before being brutally attacked. Meanwhile, on the other side of town at the real estate agency, Claudio impatiently drummed his fingers on the table. The hotel investors were beginning to lose interest. The broker was already tired of waiting. While Leosio hadn't reached a final agreement, Claudio decided to act on his own and secure his prize. He had some connections in the criminal underworld, which helped him secure the support of document forgery experts. And so, under the pretext that Leosio was extremely busy, Claudio quickly sold Vittoria's land to the representatives of the construction company. It's a pleasure doing business with you, said the construction company's lawyer, shaking Claudio's hand. Can we go right now and inspect the land? Asked the company representative. Of course the land is at your disposal, replied Claudio with an arrogant smile. He was more than satisfied with the deal. Thank you for your generosity. This land will bring us much more profit than you imagine. The company representative smiled back, and soon everyone headed to the sales site. While the builders assessed the land they had illegally acquired, Vittoria was in the hospital, recovering from the attack she had suffered. Vittoria finally regained consciousness, but she remembered nothing about the boat trip. Her last memory was of when Leosio invited her to see the bay and discuss the divorce. After that, her memory faded into total darkness. When Letitia learned of the failed assassination attempt, she decided to take precautions. She knew what had happened, and to ensure things fell into place, she went to the police and claimed to have witnessed Christian trying to drown Vittoria in the sea. "That guy's completely lost it," she shouted, at the police, making a big drama, like a devastated friend. "I saw everything. He tried to kill her. Oh, I've heard that these crazy artists do things like that, but Christian, that scoundrel, seems to have completely lost his mind." A few hours later, the police arrested Christian in the city where he was selling his paintings. Taken to prison, he had no chance to defend himself. No one paid attention to his words about Vittoria's husband trying to kill her. "Enough lies," shouted the irritated investigator. "Everyone knows your mother was hospitalized for killing your father with a knife. Don't try to fool us." He approached Christian with a threatening look. How can you be so sure? Maybe you just don't remember trying to drown Vittoria and then, realizing what you'd done, calling the doctors to save her. It wasn't me." Christian shook his head, exhausted. He looked directly at the investigator and tried to argue, "Do you really trust Leticia more than me? She comes from a family of criminals." But the answer was cutting. "What we know for sure is that a well-known businessman from the capital would have no reason to kill his wife, especially when she had just lost a child a month ago. Any attempt at defense was useless. Christian had no choice but to await his court hearing date. Meanwhile, Leosio tried to remain calm. Sitting in his apartment, he swallowed generous gulps of whiskey, feeling the alcohol burn his throat. By this point, he already knew that Vittoria had survived. Leticia had warned him, assuring him that, for now, she could place all the blame on the homeless young man. But for how long would that last? She herself couldn't say. Sooner or later, the police would start asking questions that neither of them could answer. Finally, Leosio made a decision. He would go to Vittoria's house. He wanted to assess the situation and check if there was any evidence that could incriminate him. However, upon arriving there, Leosio encountered a very unpleasant surprise. To his utter disbelief, the hotel investors were on the site. The men walked around the property with the map in their hands, excitedly discussing the project for the future construction. Confused, Leosio approached and asked what they were doing there. Anyone. The businessmen stared at him as if he had gone mad. "What a strange joke, Leosio," one of them said. "We'll sort everything out with you in a few hours." Or was the money we transferred to you not enough? It was at that moment that he realized what had happened. That sale hadn't been made by him. It could only be Claudio's doing. The dishonest broker. Furious, Leosio rushed to the real estate office. Arriving there, he found Claudio calmly organizing some documents on the table, as if nothing had happened. The businessman entered like a hurricane, slamming the door shut. "You miserable rat! Did you think I was going to let this betrayal go unpunished?" he shouted, lunging at the broker. Claudio, however, remained calm. "I don't understand your complaints, Leosio. The land was sold, and the money has already been duly transferred to a secure account." "What account?" roared Leosio, his face red with anger. "Where is my money, you scoundrel?" Without restraint, he grabbed Claudio by the collar of his shirt and lifted him slightly off the ground. Even so, the broker maintained his composure. "You took too long to act, Leosio," he said coldly. "Time ran out, so I decided to take matters into my own hands." Claudio knew very well that, having obtained Leosio's forged signature, he no longer needed to worry about dividing the profits. Why settle for crumbs when he could have the whole cake? The broker tried to break free from Leosio's strength, writhing like a snake, but the businessman, accustomed to training regularly at the gym, was stronger. With a brusque pull, Leosio lost control of the situation, and Claudio was thrown out of the third-floor window, falling with a scream. Terrified at the realization that this could end in death, Leosio didn't hesitate, fleeing the office as fast as he could. What he didn't know was that Claudio, always cautious, had installed cameras hidden away in his room for a long time. Everything was recorded. Desperate, Leocio decided he needed to disappear from the city. But, just before leaving, something occurred to him. The treasure hidden in Vittoria's house. It would be his last card to play. Taking advantage of the darkness of the night, he went to the house on the beach. With the hotel investors absent at that moment, he had no difficulty breaking the lock and entering stealthily. Following the instructions Letitia had given him, Leonzo began frantically searching for the hiding place. With a crowbar taken from his bag, he ripped out, one by one, the floorboards of Antonia's house. When the last board broke with a dry crack, a strange sound echoed through the room. Ran. It was a hidden mechanism, something the cautious Romain had installed years ago, in case thieves or smugglers tried to break into the house and steal his secret. In the next second, Leoncio barely had time to process what was happening. A concrete wall slowly slid aside, revealing a hidden space. Usin. Before he could react, a huge slab of stone collapsed on him. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the secret compartment were the boxes he had been searching for. But if he had been conscious enough to see them, Leocio would have been perplexed. The boxes were there, but they were completely empty. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, something extraordinary was happening to Vittoria. Lying in her hospital bed, she was overcome by a sudden shock of memory. The images returned like a whirlwind. The proposed outing, the glass of wine she refused, the blow to the head, the cold, dark water enveloping her as she drowned. She remembered everything. The following morning, upon learning from the news that an innocent man had been convicted in her case, she demanded to speak to the investigators and tell the truth. A nurse confirmed that the paramedics had highly praised the young homeless man she had rescued. Thanks to this testimony, Christian was released that same day. As soon as she was discharged, Vittoria went directly to the place where she knew he lived. She needed to see him. After all, because of Letitia, he had almost been unjustly convicted. Letitia disappeared from the city, was back home just hours after Christian's release. Vittoria broke off all contact with her as soon as the young man revealed his true identity and involvement in crime. The con artist decided to hide for a while with her criminal relatives. Meanwhile, Vittoria faced a new challenge, fighting to recover her house from the hotel investors, something that wouldn't be easy due to the falsified documents. Luckily, Claudio survived the fall from the third floor, despite breaking both legs, as he was fortunate enough to land on a flowery lawn, preventing fatal injuries. Christian, determined to help Vittoria, threatened to report Claudio to the police for document fraud if he didn't cancel the legal sale of the land. The real estate agent, with no other options and desperate to save his own skin, agreed to confess everything. After all, more than anything, he wanted to stay alive. As for Leocio, he also survived the collapse of the stone slab. However, he suffered irreversible spinal damage and would never walk again. He was now condemned to live confined to a wheelchair. Thus, once he regained consciousness and understood his situation, the first thing Leocio did was call his lawyer. He was terrified of the possibility of being taken to trial and facing the police. However, Vittoria wasn't so cruel as to send an incapacitated man to prison. She believed that fate had already imposed a sufficiently severe punishment on her ex-husband for all the harm he had caused her. Therefore, she decided not to press charges against him, leaving him completely stunned. Meanwhile, with the help of Christian and Claudio himself, Vittoria managed to annul the illegal sale of the land. Antonia's house returned to its rightful owner. Determined to restore it, Vittoria began the renovation work. Christian proved to be a great ally in this task, helping her in every way he could. Furthermore, the young painter showed increasingly genuine affection for her. What no one knew was that Romao, the sailor who had originally hidden the treasure in the house, had also been deceived. At the last moment, before departing for his final voyage, someone switched the precious stones from the sea, and scraps of crumpled newspaper. Romao set sail on his final voyage, promising his beloved that he would return to find her and recover the treasure. But he never returned, and his death left Antonia desolate for many years. Antonia, unknowingly, saved her own life. Had she touched the wrong boards, the wall would have collapsed on her. Vittoria and Christian, in turn, began a new life together, happy and fulfilled in their fully restored home. Sometime later, Vittoria became pregnant and gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Christian also saw his luck change. His paintings were discovered by a famous entertainment star who bought some of his works. This brought enormous visibility to his work, and soon he began receiving orders from various parts of the country. Meanwhile, Sebastião continued to visit Vittoria and her new husband frequently. The children, André and Sofia, loved to call him Grandpa, something that always moved the old sailor. Whenever he heard those words, Sebastião could barely hold back his tears, touched by their affection that he finally found in that family. As for Leocio, after everything that happened, he began to reflect on the life he had led up to that point. Unable to walk, Leocio decided to change his life. He became a volunteer at a social institution, helping other people with disabilities reintegrate into society and have a more independent and meaningful life. At the same time, he continued managing his businesses, but now with much more modest ambitions. He no longer pursued unbridled profit and finally learned the lesson that fate had imposed on him. In this process of transformation, Leocio also abandoned Ruth, who believed that he would still take care of her. Without money, support, or any influence, she was left completely helpless. Alone and without prospects, she was forced to leave the city, disappearing without anyone knowing her whereabouts. Thank you very much for following the story to the end. If you liked it, don't forget to show your support by clicking the like button. For you it's just a click, but for me it means a lot. A big hug and see you in the next story.